So we are going to be talking about email, in case you didn't see that on the way in. If you want to run out of here right now, totally cool with that. You won't offend me in any way possible. All right, cool. So is there anyone here that does not get email? Awesome. So Anthony's going to pass around a notepad. If everyone just wants to pop their email address on there, I'm going to get you signed up for my newsletter. All right, so of course I would never, ever do that. You don't really have to pass it around. But like that's one of the stigmas of email, and like one of the things that I don't do and that I want to get around, and like one of the things that we'll share on like how you can get around some of the stigmas that we have for emails in general. So the goal for today is to get everyone in this room excited, or at least interested enough to go learn about creating emails so that our inboxes get better. I get a lot of email. I'm sure I'm not alone in that. And I don't get a lot of good email. I get a lot of crap. And so I'd like to see that change. And so I'm going to share the stuff that I've learned over the past 2 years that can make it better. You're not going to walk out of here like ready to code your own email today. It's more just I'm going to set you off on some of the stuff that you can do to make it cool. So I am a front-end developer. I haven't made the switch to just being a complete email person. So some of my time at work, I work for a company called Code School, and we do in-browser training for web technologies. So we teach like things like Sass or JavaScript or Rails or anything like that. So some of my time is spent working on the .com version of our site, some of it doing UIs for courses. But I've been there for a little over 2 years, and about 2 years ago, my boss at the time, Jason Van Loo, decided that I was going to be doing the HTML emails. And so I reacted pretty much like the way that everybody should react when you get told something like that. And this is just another one of those things. And I did a whole talk. I actually did it at a web afternoon with Jay on how I got over my own personal problems with being the email guy. But I'm just going to share a few of the things that I've learned along the way, and then we'll dive into the design and the development stuff. So the most important thing is I love people. I love being here. Kind of questionable about being right here, but definitely being at BlendConf with a bunch of people that are interested in learning, sharing, hanging out, talking. Last night we went to dinner. And so we went to dinner, and there was a back-end, like full-on like server developer, a designer, a JavaScript guy, an email guy, and a WordPress guy. We're all just hanging out, talking shop, and I love that type of thing with conferences and people in general. Before I started working at Code School, I was a customer at Code School. So I completely identify with all of the people there. And so I use that to make sure that I focus on when I send a message or an email, I want it to be something that I would have wanted to receive. So that's just one way of like focusing on it. Totally can't see what this actually looks like, but if we have to send out a message, there's 2 more bars right along here. So in overall marketing type of things for the company, there is a little sliver on the right that's 0.5% Google+, and 5.5% Twitter, 8.7% Facebook, and then 85% of it is email. So it's our largest way of communicating with our customers. So the other thing is for revenue tracking. One of the really exciting things about this is you can, if you're able to set up your system in this way, you can send an email and then track that through to show exactly like how much it generated in sales. It's not perfect, but you won't get false positives. You just might miss some because people might have gotten it and then come back later to buy something or whatever. But the really fun part about this is a couple weeks ago we had a campaign. It was back to school, so you got a significant discount if you bought an annual subscription. And so we sent out an email on Monday, and it was like, hey, this is a thing we're promoting, and we're going to do it all week. And then on Friday, we sent out one that said, it's the last day for this. You have until midnight. And that particular message generated more revenue for the company than my annual salary. So that was just a really, really, really cool thing. And so I was excited about that. And I didn't get clearance on sharing that, so I'm sure it'll be cool. Because we're a really good company. I really enjoy working there. And it sounds hokey, but we operate under kind of the Disney principle of like, we don't create all these things in order to make money. We make more money so that we can keep creating all this awesome stuff. So I get to do things like go crazy on HTML emails. So the one big thing that I try to focus on all along is to get away from the fact that there is just horrible reputations of email from the spam and the code and all that stuff. I just try to focus on the fact that I'm designing some way to communicate with our customers. And so we do that in two different ways. You have promotional emails, so that is like the thing I was talking about where I'm sending a message out saying like, this is something we're offering or this is something new. Then there's transactional emails, and that comes from originally transactional emails where like financial institutions, quite literally every transaction had some kind of message for it. Now we use it, it's a little bit more like event-driven emails is kind of what they are. So someone registers for an account on the site, they're gonna get a message, and then 2 or 3 days after that, they're gonna get a handful of messages, in a series that kind of welcome them and onboard them to their thing. So we design all of those. It's our best way of communicating with our people. One of the best people at this is a guy named Kevin Mandeville. He is a designer at Litmus, and so they do email testing, which is a vital part of developing these things. And so he has created a couple really cool messages. This one in particular, Litmus was starting up a community, basically a forum for people that do HTML email design. And on top of just being like an interesting and like clean layout, what's going on up at the top is CSS animation that's just rotating a whole bunch of avatars. The GIF destroys it a little bit, but it was really nice. But then he also grabs Gravatar and puts my avatar right in there. So it's like, oh, you can be part of this, and it's like personalized. So if you have a Gravatar, you are getting your avatar right there. Just a cool little moment. He then decided to one-up everybody in the email community and sent a message with HTML5 video in the background of the header. And that is just crazy complex and pushing the technology like as far as it can go. And on top of doing it, he also put out a blog post just showing exactly how he did it. Like my jaw hit the floor when I opened up Apple Mail and saw that. This is another interesting one, organizing for action. So they're looking for donations from St. Petersburg. They have my zip code. So what they do is they go hit the Google Maps API, the static map API, and use my zip code to put out a map of my area. Do I need a map of my area to know that that's where I live? No. But is it kind of cool? Does it feel like they actually were sending this directly to me and not just in a blanket audience? Yeah, so it was a really cool little thing. This one was so fun. I couldn't find the email. I spent more time than I want to admit trying to track it down in like my old inboxes. But I was like, oh, cool, little animation with some text. But then like Kevin Spacey just looks up, and I was a huge fan of the show, so like I probably opened this email about 30 times, watched it. So inspiration can come in two ways. It can come from work that is significantly better than yours, and you're aspiring to do better, or it can come from work that you or your company are already doing that you think you can make better. So this was an example when I first got the nod to be doing HTML emails. This was the email newsletter that was going out on a monthly basis. And so our founder was using the skills that he had. It worked, it went out, but it wasn't responsive, and we were changing brands, and I wanted to make it better than it was at the time. This is another example. It had the right brand colors of the site at the time, but this was like what a message went out if your subscription was about to renew for the month. So this was my first email newsletter, and it wasn't very good. I did get the brand colors in there, but I was trying to do this thing where marketing wanted to be able to edit the emails and create the copy and add images. So I was creating these systems of drag and droppable information and like allowing them to repeat content, and they always ended up just kind of mediocre, and I wasn't thrilled with it. And then one day, I was working remotely, and we had a really cool course branding coming up, and I was like, I'm not doing that this time. I'm going to make this thing custom. I'm going to show off these skills. I'm going to show off these assets and make it really cool. And so I did that, and it was received really well. And then since then, we don't do the drag and drop things anymore, and I actually enjoy my job. This is just a couple examples of the fun things that we get to do. Like like I said earlier, I'm not a designer, so I didn't create these assets. I just create the layouts. This one was fun. The GIF borked, but the hand would just shoot up, like in the email and stuff. Something that is a kind of unexciting thing is you got invited to join your team, which it's kind of a boring message. So we just try and throw a little personality in there. This, if you have a problem with your Code School subscription, you probably can't read it, but that is an arcade that says insert coin. So we're just kind of like trying to be fun and a little bit friendly along with this stuff. And then if you cancel your subscription, we send you off in a car with your luggage. And so it doesn't repeat in the actual email, but gifts repeat on here. So I didn't want to share things that I liked or that I was proud of without sharing a humbling moment. And so this was that message that I sent out the other day that I said did really well. And so I tried pulling off this really complex thing. We'll get into tables and how horrible they are. And so like how it's really hard to do just something like putting that badge on the right of a button. And the marketing guy, Corey, that I work with, he's so awesome, and he comes up with these little layouts and UIs and stuff, and I try to get them as much as I can. And so I was like, oh, I made this thing, and it worked. And so I got it, and I tested in my normal stuff, and everything looked great. And I didn't do my litmus testing, and then I sent this, and it was broken. And I got helpful comments from one of our customers that let me know that I should learn how to code before I try and teach them how to code. Good point, good point. But the reason why I shared this is because, like, for one, it's just funny. But the other is the testing is absolutely the most important part of creating emails. And the guy that said it's best was Jason Rodriguez. And he said it's important to know where your audience is, how they're opening, and then just build and test for that. Because if you try and build and test for every single client, and you would never ship a message. So you can kind of see this, maybe? No. So this is our stats for Code School. So I just know these other ones over here, but desktop is 70%, mobile is just under 30% for our opens. That changed. So it used to be mobile had crept up over 50%. It was about 54 at its peak. And then Gmail, who changes things very often, changed the way that they handle images. So in emails, there's 0 JavaScript support. So you're not sending like a Google Analytics along for a tracker. The way that they track them is the email sender puts a little image in there, and if that image is requested, then that's an open. And so that's how they track your analytics. So Gmail changed the way they handle images. They're like, we're going to take all the images and cache them, and then everyone's going to get images all the time. Surprise, surprise, their open rate went insanely up. So it's still 45%. It's still one of our bigger things. It was always one of our biggest, so I still have to pay a great amount of attention to it. But the interesting thing about these three is Gmail, Apple Mail, and iPhone are our top 3, and together they're about 80% of the people that are opening an email. The beautiful thing for me is that that's me. So I can test 80% of all the stuff I need to by just using my Mac, opening Apple Mail, checking a couple apps on my phone and on my desktop. And then Android, which was that screenshot just a second ago, is 2.9%. And you might think that's not that big of a deal, but when you talk about a list the size that we have, that's somewhere in the area of like 23,000 people that got that broken experience, which kind of sucks. And it's really just because I didn't do the testing. So once you know who you're going to be sending messages to or who's opening them, Campaign Monitor built the best resource for creating HTML emails, and what they do here is they keep a running track of all of the CSS support for the most popular clients. It's an invaluable resource. It's open on my computer all the time. It's wonderful, and I don't expect you to be able to read that, but we'll go over like a few of the ones that are kind of important. So if you're sending a message and it's going to be opened in Gmail or Yahoo Mail or Outlook.com, you can't link a style sheet. So the very, very common practice of writing HTML in one file and writing CSS in another and then linking those two, you can't do that, or, well, you can do it, but your CSS won't be served to any of those clients. Another fun one for Gmail to make things more interesting, you also can't take all that CSS that you wrote and then just put it in a style tag in the head. That would be really cool, but you can't. And so I put no because they do support some. They don't strip the whole style tag, but they only render some of the styles. So you can get away with things like hover in Gmail head styles. If your people reading your emails are using Outlook, you get no CSS position support. So the 2 keys for that one is you have no float, no display inline block. So how do you do a layout when you don't have floats or display inline block? Tables. So you use tables for layout. And so everybody knows that this is just an awful experience that we're going to drudge on and show like how awful it can get. So I thought, you know, like people that have learned web development in the past 5 or 6 years might not have ever done tables for layout, might not have even learned it was a thing that we used to do that was dark and dirty and horrible. So I grabbed like a popular code base. This is Bootstrap. They have a thing called the Jumbotron. It's not too far off from what you might see in an email. You probably wouldn't have the header links, but you're going to have a header, some opening copy, a call to action, maybe some supporting information in a couple of columns. I don't expect you to be able to read this, but it's actually not that bad. But I jumped into their code just to see what they're doing. So they start up at the top with a div class of a container, div for the header, div for the Jumbotron, div of a row, and then in that 2 divs that are aligned using CSS in a grid system. So that's not too far off from what a table would look like. The div class equals container would be your open table. Div class equals row would be a table row. And the 2 grid divs would actually be cells. Now, this is a really basic example of a table, but you wouldn't actually do this if you wanted to align things and then be able to do them responsive later, which we'll show in a bit. This is kind of crazy. So I wanted to show why people hate HTML email or table layouts in general. So you take that thing we had where all of the, everything has to be written in a table, and so now every item in there, that div class equals container, the header, the Jumbotron, all of those things are individual tables. Then you step a little bit further and you say, okay, well now I need to put all these normalizing things on every single one of those tables. And before long, you're just in a dark chasm of HTML. And so the point of all of this is that if you're using tables or using anything in a way that you're not supposed to, it can hurt. So, so moving on from that, that's just our HTML structure at this point. So now let's talk about CSS. We talked about earlier, you cannot you use a linked style sheet. You cannot put all the CSS in your head. The only thing that leaves you with is inline styling. So the ultimate no-no of any modern front-end developer, you have to do it for everything, ever, always. And so then you have questions like, do you want to automate inlining or not? I don't, but I don't think that that's the best answer. The reason I don't is because I learned how to do HTML back when we weren't using CSS yet, so I have a lot of muscle memory for it, and I use other solutions to reduce the amount of code that I have. But there are fantastic tools for this. So you can still write your CSS out in a different way, write CSS, style the whole entire email, and then if you're comfortable with build tools, you can run a build tool that will inline all that CSS right on your machine. You can pop it into a generator on the site, and then also most of the popular tools will also inline all of that for you. MailChimp, Campaign Monitor, those types of things. So what about the responsive portion of all of this? So the way that responsive has been dealt with by most people is we went the way that responsive happened when it first came out. So it was this retrofitting type of responsive. So everyone had static layouts. You then just use media queries to then turn things into fluid layouts to try and shrink things down to the screen. It's how we kind of got started. Everyone was figuring out all of this. We're still figuring it out when we're doing HTML emails. So the way that I typically do things is I think about them mobile first, but I still have to write everything desktop first. So when I'm creating a layout, I'm trying to think, how is this going to stack? How is this going to look at a small screen? I think about that first because I ultimately think you could actually just ship mobile layouts and be fine for most emails. Because if you're making stuff that's too big for a mobile layout, you got to question that anyway. But you have to write desktop first because you need to get all your tables in line, all your inline styling, all that fun stuff. Then just use media queries to override it. So far we know that we have a wide array of client support. We're probably going to be doing tables for layout. And then we will be using inline CSS most likely. So here's a really tiny version of a message. All right. Yeah, okay. Okay, cool. So what I made really quick was I wanted to grab some of the styles from the BlendConf site and make an email. And this is a really cool choice of placement for a button. But anyway, I just wanted to show how some of these things stack. So if you go down here, you got a bunch of copy and various things. If you look over here where you just stack things normally, this is that standard trick of just putting markup in the order that you want it and then floating it in different ways, but in HTML emails, you're not floating it, you're actually using an align equals X on the table. So when we were talking about how everything has to be a table, oh no, always design at the resolution that you're going to be working with. There we go, awesome. So this is showing every single table throughout this. So as you're breaking things down, the reason why I was talking about earlier that you can't align things by having them in two cells is the few applications that really do support responsive web design or responsive layouts don't support cells being used as display block. So, like that's a really popular use for using responsive tables in regular web development. So you just have to line every table right next to each other and have them go on through. So this is just all the tables along in there. If you break that one step further, these are all the cells involved in each of these. And the reason I do these weird things on the left is Mailbox app is a really popular app. I like it a lot, but they don't handle responsive emails very well, and they allow your layout to go straight to the edges. So every bit of like copy that you have in there, you're like right on the wall. So I run these horrible fixed cells with a width of 20 pixels that I just set a gutter on it so that it stays off of there. So when you are going to jump into this kind of stuff, the one modern web practice that you can use is just kind of doing your own little style guide. So I run down here, I'll set all of my headers, an image, a link, then a very, very typical layout, which is probably easier to see here, is this image with a title and some copy and then an action. Take that and then throw a background color on it. That's another typical pattern, and then below that you've got your split columns. The interesting thing about that email that was for BlendConf, that's 742 lines of code. Nobody wants to deal with that. It's just awful, and it's like you're digging through these cells, and I don't know if anybody used to develop it this way, but if you ever don't close a cell or a row and you can't find it, oh, it just hurts. It hurts. So let's just jump into a few of the things. One of the few tips, if you're working with specific clients, you have to dive in, you have to learn all their nuance. They all suck, they're all really bad, but all of the problems are known, and they've been known forever. So people have countless posts on like how to fix everything that you would ever need to fix in the various clients. There's even a HTML5 boilerplate for it that does most of the fixes for the various web clients too. But the important thing is pretend that margin doesn't exist. It's horribly supported throughout all of the clients. So you just kind of have to avoid it. You can use padding, but you really only want to use padding on a cell and not on HTML elements. And actually, HTML elements, like things like paragraphs, tight headers, all that stuff, you should probably avoid it if you want a consistent layout, because just like in the web and browsers, you get clients that decide to set their own specific styles on those. The one thing I haven't been able to get away with or tear myself away from is headers. So I just want to be able to follow some kind of document outline throughout this thing, and so I still do that, but I put reset CSS on every single one of them. And so you also have to apply as much as that possible to the table or the cell itself, because that's what they all support. They're very weak on things like element CSS. So this is the fun thing of styling up like an H1 and H2. So every single one of these is always going to have their color, your font size, and then I do a margin 0 just as a reset for those. The CSS for making that responsive, that's going to go in your header. So earlier I was talking about how you don't put CSS in your header for like things like Gmail. Everything else does support it. So the ones that support responsive layouts on your phones do support that. So this all goes in your header. The fun thing is you're overwriting inline styles. So CSS specificity means that now you get to throw important tags on every bit of CSS that you ever write, and you cry. So then there's the image, typical thing. You just do max width of 100% and important. Here's the fun where we were looking at all those pink lines earlier, showing all those tables. Every single one of those is going to open like this. Table border equals 0, so padding equals 0, class, and then my color, and font family, and line height, all this junk every single time. No good. So then you just use a simple class to then make that flexible at whatever resolution you do. 600 pixels is a very popular thing because of preview pane. Originally, when people created emails, they thought everyone was going to open them in those things and double-click every one of them, and then they open into like this big screen. Nobody does that. Everybody just looks at it in the preview pane. So preview panes or earlier layouts, they were only like 600 pixels, so you had to design everything for 600 pixels. That's where that number comes. But nowadays, you can design them like crazy because people are using Gmail on their gigantic screen. You can actually do some fun stuff at wide screens if you're into that kind of thing. So this is like the very, very typical layout. You got an image, a header, some copy, a button, and this is all of the code that goes into that kind of thing. So you've got a table that opens up. I use these hard-coded height rows. It's the most supported, but you can get away with doing padding if you don't want to do that. So then you throw in your image, some more spacer rows, and this is one thing I just told everyone not to do, but I do it, and that is putting padding directly on an element. Outlook is not going to render that at all, but I'm cool with that. If it's only 5 pixels, you're using Outlook, the header can be right on top of the text. I'm cool. Everything else is going to work. If I need a significant gap, like I need 20, 25 pixels, I'll break that off into another row and adds a spacer row in between them, and then go back on through that. Down here, this is some really exciting code. Everyone's written this before, right? So this is like I can't remember the name of the technology. I think it's VML. So this is VML that makes it so that a button looks like a button in all of the Outlook apps. But then you get to do just normal CSS on everything else, and everything's cool. It's the most consistent button. It's actually a generator called Bulletproof Buttons, which is really cool. So at this point, I was going to show some other layouts and show like how cool you can get things. But then Action Rocket like Kanye'd me like 2 weeks ago. And so they came out with quite literally the best responsive layout there is so far. So I was talking about earlier how we were all retrofitting everything. We're writing everything at 600 pixels. We're then like shrinking things down, overriding them. So they came up with this really awesome solution that is like a hybrid coding. So you do this combination of using tables, and it's a lot of tables and it's a lot of code, and I didn't want to even try and show it on the screen. You just have to dive into it. So if anybody is in here that I haven't just turned you off of HTML email enough yet, and you're going to go learn this stuff, this is absolutely the one that you want to go see. I have tweeted my slides out twice because the first one didn't work, and so they're all out there. So I know like everyone's taking notes, but this will all be online. You'll be able to grab all of this fun stuff. So then beyond just building the email, then if you're dealing with multiple emails, you need to have more things, like the ability to update an image here and there. Can I have all of my emails in one location? So like I was talking about earlier, some are promotional and some are transactional. So promotional typically will run out of MailChimp, but then some transactionals will run out of MailChimp if you're using like auto configurations. But then a lot of them will run out of Mandrill because you're sending them actually being triggered by your application. And then sometimes you'll have some other code in your Rails application that then triggers another email that goes from Mandrill. It's a lot of craziness, and so I wanted all things in one location. Can I do something cool, like have a single layout? I'm repeating a lot of code. I'm using a header in every single one of these emails. Can I repeat that? Nah. Can you use preprocessors? Nope. So I was like, I want to use all these things. So one of the things that was a little gotcha is we were sending out emails, and social icons, everybody loves putting those onto everything ever, right? But the kind of thing you just kind of set and forget. And so my boss got an email from Twitter, and they were like, hey, we see that you're using a Twitter icon in all of your emails to your customers. That's great. You're using the old bird. Please stop. And I'm like, oh, God. I was like, okay, so cool. I'll grab that, and I'll just grab that image and just upload it to MailChimp, and everything's cool. Nope. So now what I have to do is I have to upload that image to MailChimp, copy and paste the new URL for that image, go into my 24 existing emails, and update that string. Not a very fun experience. You got me once. You'll never get me again. So what I did now is we use MailChimp for any message that has images that are going out the one time, but anything that's in all of our emails, these are on S3. So when I need to update, when any of these change their logos again and I need to update that, I'm just going to ship that message up to S3. And the nice thing is, because it's a web request, that will update everyone's email every time they open it. So even if they go back to an old email, they'll have the new ones on there. So it's cool. We'll actually be using this for the first time in like 2 weeks when we update our site and our logo. So I'll be able to just update my logo. Ooh, that's scary. So I wanted all the other things, right? I wanted layouts. I wanted to use preprocessors. I wanted just to, feel like I was whole a little bit. And so I used a static site generator because that can give me all of these things. So I just took Jekyll and I just made some stuff in there that allowed me to, you can't operate dry because everybody wants to do dry, don't repeat yourself. So my sad little version of this is repeat yourself as little as possible. So for organization, I wanted to be able to see all of the messages that I have in MailChimp and Mandrill and all of these things all in one shot, be able to review them with my team, talk about flows. So in there, I just have a really simple table. This has every email. Like I have a long one for code school ones because I have like 27 active ones, and then I retire them, and I have drafts and all the stuff that I can go through this. This just keeps all of your emails in there. For layout, I'm repeating a whole lot of code all of the time. And where'd Adam go, please? Yes. All right, so I'm repeating a lot of code all the time. And so how we talked about things like you can't include your style in your CSS. Well, you can if you're using something like a static site generator because it's just going to output all that into an HTML file for you. So every email has a doc type and all of this stuff that goes into every single one of them. I don't want that in every message that I'm having to work on and in. So I just create a layout for that. And then that CSS, this is all of the base CSS that I use for pretty much every email. It's just like very, very simple overrides for typography and forcing everything to be fluid at smaller levels. And then variables. One of the ways that you cannot repeat yourself all the time is to use variables. Everybody loves variables. So I wanted to use them. And so I use them in here, and this is YAML front matter. So what this is it allows me to do things. This is why I don't do inline styles very much, is all that stuff at the top is just meta information, but like something very simple like that URL tracker. So that's going to be on every link that we send out in an email that's going back. And some of those they have a lot of links in them. So I don't want to have to look at that every single time. So that tracker just gets called in this A, just like this. So now all I have to do is have that tracker everywhere. I can update that once up at the top, and that takes care of all that stuff. The stuff I showed earlier with having border 0, cell padding 0, all that, and then your font families and everything, all of that is in here. If you open that into a table, you're just putting my table typeset, table base. I could shorten these up too, but they at least make it readable for anybody that jumps into here in case I ever get hit by a bus and somebody else has to do HTML emails. Oh, that's so scary. So the other thing I do is I put everything into colors the way that we would want the ability to change colors on the fly, so that header, footer, the base, the background, all of that stuff in the email, my gutter, all of those things are styles that I can just change one time up in the top, so every usage of that throughout the email is all updated very quickly. So some of you might have noticed that the code looked kind of funky if you haven't ever seen HAML before. So this down here is HAML. It's the way I prefer to write. I think it's just more readable for me, and it does this other thing. So I was talking about earlier how you have a cell or a row that you might not have closed, and that's a really big problem when you're writing a whole lot of HTML. HAML is nice enough to just error out on you every time you do anything wrong, so then you figure out that you just did something wrong right away instead of trying to track it down later, which is really cool. So if you compare like this content container right here versus this, it's just a difference in being able to read the code. There's just a lot more code that goes into writing regular HTML stuff. Finally, snippets. So despite everyone else finishing, it seems like I have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to just show this really quick. So snippets, I have this demo. So the way I originally set up that global was so that I was going back and forth all the time, and I would be like, I don't want to have to remember what all of my H1 and H2 stuff is. So I would have that in the file. I would go there, copy and paste it, bring it over into my message whenever I wanted a title or whenever I wanted a particular layout of the tables. So for this, we have this file right here called demo. Has nothing in there right now. So I cheated with one little bit and just kept this image right here. So this is the way that I typically write things. So I would open a content table, and it jumps pretty far. I usually name it. I'm going to skip that. I put an image. I'm going to have that 560. Ooh, and that's not going to work very well. Live coding is so great. So I'm going to put that there. I already have a spacer row right here. So then I would open another row. I'm going to have a header. And then below that, I'm going to have a spacer. And because I only want a little bit of space, I'm going to have that at 5. Then I'm going to open another row, and we'll have our copy. And then finally, your other row. Ooh, hey. And my last thing I would have actually done there is a closing. So does anyone have a favorite HTML or hex value? Hex value? Someone has a favorite hex value. Don't be scared. No? All right. Mine is B51F24. So that's how geeky we're going to get today. So mine is B51F24. So I'm just going to slap that up there, and then you see that was able to create the message, throw like the color of the header, and we'd be able to do all of the different stuff that we would want to go. I'm just using Atom snippets in that one, yeah. You could use text expander, you could use anything, but if you're going to have to, that's the reason why I wanted to show this, is if you're going to have to write all of this garbage all of the time, what you want to do is not write it. You want to write short little things that allow you to just put the garbage in there in a good way. So the final thing that I will close with is something that I'm actually working towards right now. So there's the layout, the thing that I was showing earlier, really inspired me. And so I was looking at that, and then I was looking at the fact that in our analytics, like 2.2% of all of our people that read our emails are like Outlook. So I'm actually playing with right now a few different layouts to just get rid of tables. So all I'm going to do is serve that way of like how you do, did anyone see the old like IE6 style sheet thing where you just kind of you contain it a little bit, but other than that, you're just getting a message with like straight text and everything like that? I'm really, really considering, I'll show it to everyone around the team, but I'm really considering running that for Outlook because you can just do that fake if Outlook stuff, make it a table, everything else, let me write normal stuff that I enjoy. And then I'll probably move to CSS inlining and everything because I can just write a CSS document, write a markup a file pretty much the way that I would want to. So that's all I have. Do we have time for questions? All right, no time for questions, but I'll be around here consuming root beer at the after parties tonight. So if anybody wants to ask any questions, I will tell you everything that I've ever learned about HTML emails. So thank you.